I am Anna, and this is the story of how I took back my life's work. If you've ever poured your heart and soul into something, only to have it stolen in the blink of an eye, it's a ding. Then you need to hear this. Oh, it's wait. It helps to know I'm not alone in this. So if my story resonates with you, let me know in the comments. Your support means more than you know. If for 3 years I was the lead research assistant for Dr. Asher Finch, to me, he wasn't just a boss, he was a mentor, a giant in the world of biotechnology, whose shadow I was proud to work in. He was the brilliant, chaotic mind, and I was the quiet, methodical pair of hands that turned his abstract theories into tangible reality. We were a team, or so I thought. We were working on something revolutionary, a molecule we called Sin-18. It had the potential to rewrite the rules of medicine, to target and neutralize rogue proteins with a precision that was once the stuff of science fiction. It was the culmination of my entire professional life, of late nights staring into microscopes until my eyes burned, of weekends sacrificed at the altar of data, of 1,000 failures that paved the way for one singular, world-changing success. The day before Asher was set to announce our discovery to the world, he called me into his office. The room always smelled faintly of old books and stale coffee, a scent I used to find comforting. That day it smelled like a tomb. He couldn't meet my eye. He mumbled something about budget cuts, about a necessary restructuring. He said it was a difficult decision, but my position was being eliminated. He slid a thin folder across his mahogany desk, my severance package. It was an execution disguised as paperwork. I just stood there, a quiet heat flushing up my neck, my mind a sudden, roaring blank. 3 years of my life, my intellectual property, my soul, reduced to a single insulting manila folder. I didn't say a word. I just nodded, took the folder, and walked out. That night, huddled in my small apartment, I saw the press release go live. Finch Labs announces groundbreaking molecule, poised to revolutionize cellular therapy. And there it was, in cold, digital print. Patent filed by Dr. Asher Finch, his name, and his alone. It felt like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that knocked all the air out of my lungs. He hadn't just fired me, he had erased me. But Asher didn't know everything. He knew I was meticulous, but he didn't grasp the depth of it. He didn't know that my meticulousness was a form of armor. In my apartment, locked in a fireproof safe, were my lab notebooks, 12 of them, hardbound, with time-stamped, dated entries for every single day of the past 3 years. They were a perfect, unassailable record. They chronicled every failed hypothesis, every contaminated sample, every dead end, most of them his, and they detailed, with crystalline clarity, the exact moment my own independent line of inquiry branched off from his, the moment I isolated the binding agent he had been missing, the moment I synthesized the molecule that now bore his name. I was the true inventor, and my notebooks were the only complete record of the journey. They were the truth. And it was a truth the regulators would be required to discover during their mandatory audit of the patent filing next week, a detail of intellectual property law I was certain his ego had overlooked. My phone rang the next morning. The screen flashed a name I never wanted to see again, Asher Finch. I let it ring, the sound shrill in the quiet of my apartment. It stopped, then immediately started again. I finally answered, holding the phone to my ear without a word. The silence stretched, and then I heard him speak. His voice, usually so full of booming confidence and casual authority, was a thin, reedy thing. It was trembling with a panic he couldn't hide. He said my name, Anna, and it sounded like a question, like a plea. In that single fractured word, I heard the entire foundation of his world begin to crack, and I knew this was just the beginning. The silence on the phone was a canvas, and on it I painted a picture of his future. I heard the tremor in his voice, the slight, wet catch in his throat, and I knew he wasn't calling to apologize. Apologies were for people who felt remorse. Asher Finch felt only pressure. This was a call of damage control. This was the first panicked twitch of a man realizing the mouse he thought he'd crushed was actually the tripwire to a bomb. I didn't speak. I let him stew in the static, let his imagination do the heavy lifting. The weight of what I knew, of what I could prove, was a physical presence in the silence between us. After he said my name, he stammered, trying to find his footing. Anna, I think there's been a misunderstanding. His voice was trying to reclaim its familiar condescending warmth, but it was like a cheap coat thrown over a shivering frame. A misunderstanding. The corporate world's favorite euphemism for getting caught. I still said nothing. My silence was a mirror forcing him to confront the frantic, ugly expression on his own face. I wanted him to fill the void, to expose his strategy. He cleared his throat, a dry, rasping sound. About the patent, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if we were partners sharing a secret, not a thief, talking to his victim. I felt a cold, hard knot tighten in my stomach. It was the same knot that had formed 1,000 times over the last 3 years, a knot of swallowed frustration, of overlooked contributions, of quiet, seething injustice. But this time, it felt different. It wasn't a knot of powerlessness, it was a knot of resolve. It felt like a coiled spring. The memories came then, unbidden, a flood of moments that had led to this one. It wasn't a highlight reel. It was a dossier of 1,000 tiny cuts. I remembered the first year, filled with a genuine, almost naive admiration for him. He was brilliant. It was brilliant. His lectures could hold an auditorium captive, weaving complex biochemistry into compelling stories. He saw potential in me, he'd said. He'd plucked me from a pool of overqualified postdocs and made me his lead. In the beginning, that felt like winning the lottery. He would leave cups of tea on my workstation when I was working late, with a little note scrawled on a napkin. Good work today, Anna. We're close. Those small gestures built a foundation of loyalty, a foundation he would later systematically demolish. Then came the second year. The shift was subtle at first. My name started disappearing from the weekly progress reports he sent to the university board. When I'd ask, he'd wave a dismissive hand. It's just internal reporting, Anna. The final publication is what matters. Don't get bogged down in politics. He was teaching me, I see now. He was teaching me to be invisible. He was conditioning me to accept my own erasure. I remember a pivotal meeting with the dean. I had spent a month developing a new culturing medium that increased our cell viability by 60%. It was my breakthrough. I presented the data to Asher, my voice buzzing with excitement. He had nodded slowly, a thoughtful look on his face. Excellent, he'd said. Truly excellent. In the meeting an hour later, he presented my slides as his own. When the dean praised the innovation, Asher smiled and said, "Yes." It came to me in a flash of inspiration late one night. He didn't even glance in my direction. I sat in the corner of that boardroom, my hands clenched into fists in my lap, my knuckles white. I felt a heat rise to my face so intense I was sure everyone could see it, but they didn't. They were all looking at him. I was just part of the furniture. Why did I stay? I ask myself that now. It's a question you're probably asking too. Is it weakness? Was I a fool? The answer is more complicated. Part of it was misplaced loyalty, a stubborn belief in the man he used to be, or the man I thought he was. Part of it was the science itself. Sin 18 was my baby. Leaving would have felt like abandoning my child. I told myself the work was more important than the credit. I told myself it wasn't about ego. That was a lie I used to get through the day. The truth is, I was afraid. Afraid of starting over, afraid of challenging a man with his reputation. He had built my cage so expertly, gilded it with opportunity and prestige, that for a long time I didn't even realize I was trapped. But the most vivid memory, the one that burned brightest now, was the night I actually made the breakthrough. It was almost 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. The lab was silent, except for the hum of the freezers and the gentle whir of the orbital shaker. Asher had been stuck for nearly a year on the molecule's delivery mechanism. His approach was too aggressive. It kept causing the target cells to lyse before the payload could be delivered. He was trying to smash the door down, and I had a quiet hunch that the solution was a key, not a battering ram. I had been running a parallel set of experiments on my own time, using a modified phospholipid carrier that was, on paper, less efficient, but far gentler. I ran the assay for the 47th time. I remember the exact moment the results spooled out of the machine. I looked at the chromatogram, at the sharp, perfect peak that indicated success. It was there. SYN18 was stable. It was viable. It worked. I didn't shout. I didn't even smile. I just sat back in my worn-out chair and felt a profound, bone-deep sense of quiet satisfaction. This was it. This was the moment. The next morning I showed Asher the data. He stared at the printout for a full minute, his face unreadable. He traced the peak on the graph with his finger. "How?" he asked, his voice flat. I explained my methodology, my theory about the gentler carrier. He listened, nodding slowly. Then he looked at me, and for a fleeting second, I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. It wasn't pride, it was envy, a dark, possessive glint. He took the printout from my hands. "I'll need to replicate this," he said, "to verify. Leave all your notes on my desk." And just like that, my breakthrough became his verification process. My eureka became his data point. That memory led to another, one from long before I ever met Asher Finch. I was in my childhood home, sitting at the kitchen table with my father. He was a physicist, a quiet man who believed the universe had a logical, elegant order. He was watching me struggle with my homework, getting frustrated and scribbling out my mistakes. He put his hand over mine. "Anna," he'd said gently, "the answer isn't the most important part. The process is. Show your work, every step, every mistake. A well-documented failure is more valuable than a lucky guess. The work speaks for itself, but only if its voice is clear." That night, he bought me my first hardbound, grid-lined notebook. He taught me to date every page, to sign the bottom, to never tear out a sheet. He taught me that a good scientist's most important tool isn't a microscope or a beaker. It's a notebook. It's the unimpeachable story of the work. In my apartment, the memory of my father's words echoed in the silence, cutting through the fog of my despair. I looked at the fireproof safe in my closet. It wasn't a collection of notes anymore. It was a weapon. It was the clear, unwavering voice my father had taught me to cultivate. My despair didn't just evaporate, it transmuted. It cooled and hardened into something else, something cold, clear and sharp, as a shard of glass. Resolve. It wasn't about revenge. I kept telling myself that. It was about the record. It was about the integrity of the work itself. The truth had been recorded. It was simply a matter of letting it be heard. Asher was still talking on the phone, his voice a frantic buzz in my ear. He was talking about a bonus, a significant one. Our engagement's bonus, he called it. He said my termination had been a clerical error, a miscommunication from HR. He could fix it. We could fix it. Just come back, Anna. We'll sort this out. We can put your name on it as a contributor. A contributor. The word hung in the air. A final, pathetic insult. I almost laughed. The catalyst wasn't just the memory of my father, or the sight of the safe. It was that word, contributor. It was the final, clarifying piece of evidence that he still saw me as a footnote in his story. He wasn't offering to correct a wrong. He was offering to bribe a witness. That's when I finally spoke. My voice was steady, devoid of the emotion that had been churning inside me for the past 48 hours. "There's nothing to sort out, Asher," I said. His frantic chatter stopped cold. "I've already sent my documentation to the regulatory board." There was a sharp intake of breath on his end of the line. I imagine him in his large leather chair, the blood draining from his face. His empire was built on a lie, and he had just learned that the truth was already under subpoena. The foundation was not just cracked, it was dust, and the walls were about to come down. The plan wasn't born in a flash of strategic brilliance. It crystallized slowly, hardening from the amorphous fog of shock and grief into a solid, clear objective. My initial reaction was pure, white-hot fury. I wanted to burn it all down. I wanted to leak my notebooks to a journalist, to watch his name get dragged through the mud on every science blog and news outlet. But my father's voice echoed in my head, a quiet counterpoint to my rage. The process is important. A public spectacle would be messy. It would pit my word against a celebrated scientist's. It would become a drama about he said, she said, not about the data. And the data, I knew, was my greatest asset. The system he was trying to manipulate, the patent office, the university's oversight committees, the peer review process, was a system built on rules and evidence. A chaotic, emotional attack would fail. A quiet, methodical, and impeccably documented case, on the other hand, would be irrefutable. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself, clutching the cold metal of the safe. It was about letting the system he held in such high regard pass its own judgment. My first step was to understand the battlefield. I spent an entire day not on science websites, but on legal ones, cross-referencing patent law with university intellectual property policies. The key, I discovered, was a clause in the university's charter I'd never paid attention to. It was a seemingly innocuous rule designed to protect the institution from fraud. It mandated an automatic and rigorous audit for any sole inventor patent filing valued over a certain threshold, especially one developed using university resources. Asher's ego, his all-or-nothing grab for glory, had triggered a process he couldn't control. He had built his own gallows. He just didn't know it yet. The policy also stipulated that all personnel directly involved in the research phase could be compelled to submit their contemporaneous notes for review. Compelled. It wasn't a request. It was a requirement. I wouldn't have to be the accuser. I would simply be a law-abiding witness. My foresight, if you can call it that, wasn't a conscious strategy to trap him. It was a habit, ingrained in me since childhood. My notebooks were my sanctuary. I opened the first one from 3 years ago. The first entry was full of optimism, detailing my initial meeting with Asher. His handwriting was in the margins from our first brainstorming session, bold and looping. As I flipped through the volumes, a narrative emerged. You could see his contributions dwindle, his notes becoming sparse, his ideas more erratic, and you could see my sections grow, my data becoming more robust, my hypotheses more focused. I hadn't just recorded my work. I had inadvertently created a timeline of his decline and my ascent. There were photos I'd taken with my phone, time-stamped, of gel electrophoresis results, taped right onto the pages. There were printouts from the mass spectrometer with annotations in my handwriting, questioning Asher's initial interpretation of the data. I had even documented our conversations. AF suggests increasing the cyclodextrin concentration. I advised against this, as my simulations show it will destabilize the tertiary structure. He insisted, running experiment #247b to confirm my simulation. Result 100% sample loss as predicted. Page after page, it was all there. A meticulous, undeniable story. It was a fortress of facts. The next piece of the plan came from an unexpected place. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. It's Marco, from the lab. Are you okay? Things are strange here. Marco was a junior technician. A kid, really, barely out of his master's program. He was smart, eager, and pathologically honest. I had taken him under my wing, teaching him the protocols, explaining the theory behind the work. I saw the same spark of passion in him that I'd had when I first started. He looked up to me. I was his mentor, in a way Asher had never truly been to me. His loyalty, I realized, wasn't to Finch Labs. It was to me. I called him. His voice was a hushed whisper. He was in a supply closet. Dr. Finch is going crazy, Anna, he said. He's been in the lab since dawn trying to replicate your final protocol. He keeps failing. The yields are a mess. He's blaming the reagents, the equipment. He even yelled at me because the incubator temperature fluctuated by half a degree. He knows the audit is coming, and he's trying to create a new set of notebooks, Marco said, his voice dropping even lower. He's trying to fake the data, to build a history that matches the patent filing, but he can't. He doesn't know the nuances, the little tricks you use to stabilize the cultures. He doesn't have the touch. A cold sense of clarity washed over me. Asher wasn't just a thief, he was an incompetent one. He had stolen a masterpiece, but he didn't know how to hold the paintbrush. Marco became my inside source, my quiet ally behind enemy lines. I told him not to do anything risky, to just observe. His texts became a running commentary of Asher's unraveling. He spilled a liter of growth medium, just stood there staring at it. He's demanding I sign off on a data log from 6 months ago. I told him I wasn't working here then. He looked like he wanted to hit me. This wasn't just satisfying to hear, it was crucial intelligence. Asher was creating a second set of books, fraudulent ones. When laid next to my originals, the forgery would be self-evident. He was tightening the noose himself. But the final piece of my leverage, the one that would transform this from a simple intellectual property dispute into a career-ending catastrophe for Asher, was something I stumbled upon by accident. I was organizing my old emails, preparing a file for the lawyer I intended to hire, when I came across a thread from about 8 months prior. It was with a Dr. Eleanor Vance, a prominent bioethicist from a rival university. I had reached out to her for an informal opinion on the potential ethical implications of Sin 18, wanting to ensure our work was on solid moral ground. We had a fascinating, lengthy exchange about patient access and the potential for misuse. Her insights were brilliant. She was sharp, incisive, and deeply principled. I had admired her from afar. On a whim, I searched her name again. Her university profile page loaded, and then I saw it. At the bottom of her biography, under personal, daughter of the acclaimed biochemist, Dr. Asher Finch. My heart stopped. I read the sentence again and again. It was like a movie scene where the camera dramatically pushes in on a single vital clue. Eleanor Vance was Asher's estranged daughter. I remembered him mentioning a daughter once, years ago, complaining that she'd gone into the soft science of ethics instead of real science like him. He'd spoken of her with a mix of disdain and something else, something that sounded like shame. And then the final, beautiful, terrible piece fell into place. I remembered an article I'd read in a trade journal announcing the members of the university's new Advanced Research Integrity Board. This was the very board that would conduct the mandatory audit on high-value patents. The board's new chair, appointed for her unimpeachable reputation and expertise in research ethics, was Dr. Eleanor Vance, Asher's own daughter. The world seemed to slow down. The pieces of the puzzle weren't just on the table. They were snapping together with a force of their own. I had the meticulous, unassailable proof. I had an inside witness to the cover-up, and the person sitting in judgment of it all was a world-class ethicist who had not only a professional obligation to the truth, but a deep, personal, and likely complicated history with the man who was lying. I didn't have to scream from the rooftops. I didn't have to leak anything. All I had to do was comply with the audit. I had to package my 12 notebooks, write a calm, factual cover letter, and send them to Dr. Eleanor Vance. I would let the truth, in all its terrible, beautiful, and ironic glory, do the work for me. The architecture of his downfall was complete. The foundation was my notebooks. The walls were his own fraud, and the keystone, holding it all together, was his own daughter. It was almost poetic, and I kept telling myself, with a certainty that was beginning to feel a little thin, that this was not about revenge. It was about balance. It was about restoring a natural order that he had so violently disrupted. The phone call was the first tremor. The moment I told Asher that my documentation was already on its way to the regulatory board, the ground beneath his feet began to liquefy. I heard a sound on his end of the line, a faint, choked gasp, as if he'd been punched. For the first time in 3 years, I had left him speechless. I didn't need to say more. The beauty of the truth is that it requires no embellishment. I simply said, "I have to go now, Asher," and I disconnected the call. I didn't hang up with a satisfying slam. I just pressed the red icon on my screen, a small, silent, digital execution. I imagined him staring at his phone, the silence in his opulent office suddenly roaring. The predator, for the first time, was feeling the cold dread of the prey. My part in the initial attack was over. I had fired the single well-aimed shot. Now my role was to become a quiet observer, to watch the shockwaves propagate through the system he had thought he owned. My phone, which had been a source of anxiety, was now my periscope. The texts from Marco started coming in a frantic staccato. He just came out of his office. His face is pale, like sheet white. A few minutes later, he's on the phone with legal. He's shouting now. I can hear him through the door. He's saying words like unauthorized disclosures and breach of contract. I felt a grim satisfaction. He was reaching for his usual weapons: intimidation, legal threats, the bludgeon of corporate power. But those tools were useless here. I hadn't breached a contract. I was complying with a legally mandated audit. He was trying to fight a flood with a sword. The next text from Marco was the one that made me realize how deep his panic ran. He's pulling all the server logs for the lab. He's trying to find evidence that I've been in contact with you. He just cornered me by the cryo storage and asked to see my phone. A spike of fear shot through me, not for myself, but for Marco. He was a good kid, and he was putting himself at risk. I texted back immediately. Wipe it. Now. Say you dropped it. Factory reset. Do not engage. Your safety is the priority. He replied a few agonizing minutes later. Done. Told him the screen was glitching, and I had to reboot. He stared at me for like a full minute, then just walked away. Anna, this is scary. I knew it was. I typed back. I know. But you're being incredibly brave. Just lay low. He's the one in the trap, not you. The silent takeover wasn't about dramatic confrontations in a boardroom. It was about this, a quiet, digital exchange of information, while the antagonist self-destructed 50 miles away. Hey, Sati. We. It was a war fought with text messages and encrypted emails, a quiet coup unfolding in the background hum of laboratory equipment. Asher was making all the noise, flailing, shouting, threatening. I was silent. My power was in my stillness, in the cold, hard fact of my notebooks making their slow, inexorable journey through the inter-office mail system. 2 days later, the first visible crack appeared in the facade of Finch Labs. I received a Google alert for Asher's name. It was a small mention in a financial news feed, the kind of thing only an obsessive analyst or a motivated adversary would notice. PharmaCorp International reportedly pausing Phase 2 integration talks with Finch Labs pending the outcome of a standard IP audit. PharmaCorp was the giant. They were the ones with the capital to take Sin-18 from a lab discovery to a global cure. Their potential partnership was the billion-dollar validation Asher had been crowing about for months. A pauses in corporate speak is not a brief intermission. It's a red flag the size of a building. It means the money is getting scared. It meant someone on the audit board, or someone in the university's legal department who had seen my submission, had made a discreet call. They weren't accusing Asher of anything. Not yet. They were simply protecting their investment from the risk of a scandal. In his world, risk is a terminal disease. That article was the first stone in the avalanche. Asher's carefully constructed world of prestige and invincibility was predicated on momentum. The moment it stalled, the entire edifice would begin to shudder. He had built a skyscraper on a foundation of sand, and my notebooks were the incoming tide. The panic must have reached a fever pitch, because later that day, he called again. This time there was no pretense of a misunderstanding. His voice was raw, frayed at the edges. Anna, what do you want? The question was a naked plea. All the bluster was gone. He was no longer the powerful mentor, the condescending boss. He was just a desperate man, cornered and afraid. This was the moment of truth, the moment where a lesser person, a person truly driven by revenge, might have listed their demands: co-inventor status, a public apology, financial compensation. But I knew with a certainty that chilled me that asking for anything would be a mistake. To negotiate is to admit that there is something to be negotiated. It would put us back on the same level, two people haggling over a stolen object. I had no intention of haggling. I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I replied, my voice calm and even. I want the same thing I've always wanted. Asher, I want the science to be sound, and the record to be accurate. He didn't understand. He couldn't. His entire worldview was transactional. Everything was a negotiation, a deal, a power play. The idea that I was motivated by something as abstract as principle was utterly alien to him. What does that mean? What does that mean? He demanded, his voice cracking. Just tell me your price. There is no price, I said. This isn't a negotiation. It's a process you initiated when you filed that patent. I'm simply a participant. The auditors have my research. I'm sure they'll be in touch if they have any questions. And with that, I hung up again. This time, the silence that followed felt different. It wasn't the quiet of a brewing storm. It was the eerie calm that comes after the lightning has struck, in the split second before the thunder roars. I had taken away his last remaining weapon, the belief that he could buy his way out of the truth. He was alone now, with nothing but his lies and the ticking clock of the audit. The takeover wasn't silent because I was being stealthy. It was silent because my opponent was shouting into a vacuum, and the only sound was the echo of his own desperation. The fallout from the PharmaCorp news was immediate and catastrophic for Asher. In the interconnected world of big pharma and biotech research, reputation is currency, and confidence is collateral. The report of a paused deal was like a diagnosis of a terminal illness. It didn't matter if it was true. The perception alone was enough to spook the herd. Other investors, smaller firms that had been circling Finch Labs, quietly withdrew their offers. Grant applications that had been on a fast track were suddenly subjected to further review. The entire ecosystem that had supported and elevated Asher began to treat him as toxic. Marco's texts painted a grim picture from inside the collapsing fortress. The lab feels like a morgue. Half the senior staff are working from home. I think they're polishing their resumes. He told me that Asher had called an all-hands meeting, a desperate attempt to project strength and calm the remaining employees. According to Marco, it was a disaster. Asher, usually so polished and charismatic, looked haggard and thin. He ranted about competitors trying to sabotage him, about corporate espionage, about baseless rumors. He promised huge bonuses to everyone who stayed loyal, but his eyes were wild, darting around the room, not making contact with anyone. He looked less like a leader rallying his troops, and more like a king, pleading with the shadows in his empty throne room. The exodus began that afternoon. 2 senior biochemists and the lead data analyst resigned by email within an hour of the meeting. They were the first to jump from the sinking ship. They didn't need to be poached. They were simply fleeing a captain who was clearly steering them toward an iceberg. This was the power shift in action. It wasn't something I was actively orchestrating. I was at home, in my small apartment, drinking tea and reading a book on cellular automata. Hey 7 was correcting itself. Hey Sith, the network of trust and professional respect that holds the scientific community together, was recoiling from a source of corruption. I had simply provided the initial data point, the catalyst. The reaction that followed was a natural law, as predictable as a chemical chain reaction. Then came Asher's last, desperate countermeasure. An email appeared in my inbox with the subject line, "URgent and confidential proposal." It was from his personal address. I opened it with a sense of detached curiosity. It was a formal offer. He was offering me everything he had denied me, and more. Co-lead inventor status on the SIN-18 patent, a new title, Director of Research and Development, a salary that was triple my previous one, a signing bonus that would have allowed me to buy my apartment building, not just my unit. He even offered a public statement to be co-written that would clarify my foundational role in the discovery. It was a king's ransom. 3 weeks ago, it would have been my wildest dream. Now, it was just pathetic. It was a confession in the form of a contract. He wasn't offering me a future. He was trying to buy my past. He was trying to purchase my silence, to retroactively sanitize his theft. The offer was a monument to his own desperation. He thought my principles, my integrity, had a price tag, and he was finally showing me the number. I read the email twice, just to savor the sheer panic encoded in its legalese. Then I typed my reply. It was very short. Dear Dr. Finch, thank you for the offer. However, as this matter is currently under official review by the university's Research Integrity Board, I believe it would be inappropriate for me to engage in any private negotiations concerning the intellectual property in question. I have full confidence in the established process. Sincerely, Anna. I hit send. There was no hesitation. Rejecting that offer was the easiest decision I had ever made. It wasn't a choice between wealth and poverty. It was a choice between my own truth and his lie. By refusing to even entertain his offer, I was invalidating his entire worldview. I was telling him that his money, his power, his threats, the only tools he had ever used to shape his reality, were worthless to me. Power isn't about having the biggest stick. It's about being in a position where you don't need one. He was trying to buy back the credibility he had lost, but I knew what he didn't. It was never for sale. The true moment of vindication didn't come from a phone call or a tense meeting. It arrived quietly, as an email. The sender was Dr. Eleanor Vance. The subject line was simple: regarding patent filing #78B42. My heart didn't pound. My hands didn't shake. I felt a strange and profound calm, the stillness that comes when you know a long journey is finally over. I clicked it open. The email was formal, addressed to me, but CC'd to the university's general counsel, the dean of the science faculty, and the head of human resources. It was a public record. It began by thanking me for my extraordinarily thorough and impeccably maintained documentation, which had been, in the board's view, the determinative factor in their review. The words felt like a weight being lifted from my shoulders, a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying for 3 years. Then came the verdict. The board has found a significant discrepancy between the submitted patent application and the contemporaneous research record. Eleanor's language was surgically precise, stripped of all emotion, which made it all the more devastating. Dr. Finch was unable to provide satisfactory answers to basic procedural questions regarding the core methodology detailed in the final synthesis protocol. Furthermore, evidence of post-facto data fabrication was discovered in the logs he submitted. The final paragraph was the kill shot. Therefore, the board unanimously recommends the following. First, that the inventorship of patent #78B42 be immediately and solely reassigned to Anna Morales. Second, that Dr. Asher Finch be placed on immediate administrative leave, pending a formal investigation into academic fraud and research misconduct. The university will be issuing a public retraction of the initial press release. I read it 3 times. Solely reassigned. Formal investigation. Public retraction. It wasn't just a victory. It was a complete and total reversal of reality. He hadn't just lost the patent, he had lost everything. His job, his reputation, his legacy, all of it, gone. Annihilated not by a dramatic outburst or a vengeful crusade, but by the quiet, undeniable weight of 12 notebooks and the principled resolve of his own daughter. The system I had trusted had worked. It had ground slowly, but it had ground exceedingly fine. I leaned back in my chair and stared out the window. The city looked the same as it had 5 minutes before, but my place in it had fundamentally changed. I was no longer the victim. I was no longer the erased assistant. I was the inventor of Sin 18. That was now a legal fact. The phone rang about an hour later. It was a number I didn't recognize, with a Swiss area code. I answered. The voice on the other end was professional, with a crisp European accent. He introduced himself as the head of global acquisitions for PharmaCorp International. He had just been informed of the university board's decision. He offered his sincere apologies for the unfortunate situation and the reputational turbulence. Then he got to the point. They were, he said, still profoundly interested in Sin 18. In fact, their belief in the molecule's potential was stronger than ever, but their confidence in Finch Labs was, to put it mildly, gone. They didn't want to partner with a lab anymore. They wanted to build a new one, a state-of-the-art facility, fully funded with complete autonomy, and they wanted me to run it. They weren't just offering me a job, they were offering me a kingdom. I didn't say yes immediately, I just listened as he laid out the terms, each one more incredible than the last. He was offering me the dream that Asher had stolen, but on a scale I had never dared to imagine. As he spoke, I realized the final truth of the situation. Asher never understood the source of real value. He thought it was in the patent, in the name, in the press release. He was wrong. The value was never in the piece of paper. It was in the mind that created it. He had stolen the map, but I was the one who knew the territory, and now a whole new continent was waiting for me to explore it. I looked at the email from Eleanor Vance, still glowing on my screen. This was the new reality, one that I had not so much built, but reclaimed. Looking back, it's easy to frame this as a story about revenge. The arrogant boss, the wronged subordinate, the final, satisfying reversal. And there is a certain undeniable satisfaction in seeing someone who built their world on arrogance and deceit, watch it crumble into dust. But the more I reflect on it, the more I realize that my repeated insistence, even to myself, that it wasn't about revenge was a crucial part of the strategy. Revenge is an emotional, often chaotic response. It's loud, it's messy, it makes you predictable. My actions had to be the opposite. They had to be calm, logical, and rooted in something more solid than a desire to see him suffer. They had to be rooted in the work itself. My power didn't come from a secret plan to destroy him. It came from a lifelong habit of meticulous documentation, a lesson taught to me at a kitchen table by a quiet man who believed in the integrity of process. My secret weapon wasn't a hidden dagger. It was 3 years of showing my work. When the time came, I didn't have to build a case against Asher. The case already existed, bound in 12 volumes, sitting in a fireproof safe. All I had to do was present it. The new lab is everything I could have imagined. It's clean, bright, and filled with the quiet hum of possibility. My name is on the door, not in small print as a contributor, but as the director. Marco is here. He was the first person I hired. He's my lead technician now, and seeing the confidence and brilliance grow in him every day is a reward in itself. We have a team of the best minds, people who were drawn not just to the science, but to the culture of transparency and respect we are building. The work on Cineine is moving faster than ever. We're already seeing results in our preclinical trials that are beyond what I had hoped for. The molecule is finally in the hands of people who see it not as a path to fame, but as a path to healing. As for Asher, I hear things sometimes. The university investigation was swift and brutal. He was stripped of his tenure and forced to resign in disgrace. The public retraction was humiliating. His name, once a titan in the industry, is now a cautionary tale whispered at conferences. He lost everything because he fundamentally misunderstood the nature of creation. He thought he could own an idea. But ideas, real, powerful ideas, don't belong to people. They belong to the work, to the process, to the truth. He tried to steal the fruit, but he never understood the tree it grew on. So this is my story. It's a story about the quiet power of competence, about the strength of integrity in a world that often rewards the opposite. It's a testament to the fact that you should never ever underestimate the person in the room who takes the most detailed notes. Your work, your value, your truth, they are your own. Don't ever let anyone erase your name from your own story, and that's a lesson for all of us. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or had your contributions erased, know this. Your worth is not determined by those who refuse to see it. It is inherent in what you do and who you are. Build your own fortress of facts. Keep your own records. Trust in your own process. Because when the time comes, that is what will set you free. Thank you for listening. If this story helped you, or if you have a story of your own, please share it in the comments, like this video, and subscribe for more stories about reclaiming your power. It makes a bigger difference than you know.